participate by phone. If you speak during the call or use a video connection, you are presumed consent to recording and use of your voice or image. At this time, I'll turn it over to Kara Hetrick, the alternate DDFO, to call the meeting to order.
Thank you, Bridget, and I call the meeting to order.
Beverly, are you ready?
Hi. Yeah, I don't know. This is an old iPad, so it's pretty blurry there. It looks like. I guess we could all introduce ourselves, whoever's on the board who's here. I'm Beverly Martin. I live in Santa Fe. I'm retired from Los Alamos, and I represent Santa Fe County. Let's see, who do we have? Who else? Stephen? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Beverly. I'm Steve McLaughlin. I am a board member of the CAB. I'm a retired attorney and real estate developer and represent South Santa Fe County.
Anyone else from the CAB on the call?
This is Abby Hayward, also a CAB board member, and I am from Los Alamos County.
Okay. So since we don't have a quorum, we're not going to ask for approval of the agenda, but I guess we'll get started. I don't have.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm
Thank you.
sorry. My name is Patricio Pacheco. I'm also a board member representing Santa Fe County.
Okay, I didn't have any old business or new business, but I thought maybe I could talk about a site that I worked on when I worked in Los Alamos. That might be interesting. I thought it was fascinating. It's Bio Canyon. It's a recreational site in Los Alamos, and there'll be a map up later and you'll be able to see where it is. It was the location of the RALA program, which stands for radioactive lanthanum, and that was started in World War II in 1944. The site, the whole canyon was used for that program. There were over 250 high explosive firing tests were conducted and in that canyon. And what they were trying to do was to find out how to place the explosives, high explosives, around a radioactive source to get a symmetrical implosion, which was what they needed in a nuclear weapon. So the experiments were non-nuclear, but they used strontium-90 as the source. So they used to get the lanthanum from Oak Ridge, and then they had a process where they would milk the lanthanum to get the strontium-90. And the story is that Hans Bethe did a calculation on the back of an envelope to predict the symmetrical implosion, and that's still used today. That's the folklore anyway. So they would get the source, and they were surrounded by HE, and then they had toluene lost my thought, detectors around it. And that's how they would work to get the implosion. So we went into, it was a project in environmental restoration when I was there. And this was in the 90s. We drilled 96 boreholes in the canyon and did a shrapnel cleanup and did extensive soil sampling. So we couldn't begin the drilling right away because there were peregrine falcon in Pueblo Canyon. And so we had to wait to begin in Bio Canyon until it was safe in Bio Canyon. So during the cleanup, let's see, when we were doing the shrapnel cleanup, we found a classified part in the canyon. So we had to bring that in and put it in a safe. And then we found an area where they had buried strontium-90 it was a fenced off area in the canyon. And strontium 90 has a half-life for about 28 years. So, and after 7 half-lives, it's not radioactive anymore or dangerous. So they put a sign up and said, don't dig here. And I forget the date they put on it, but it was 28 times 7, since, so that it wouldn't have it. So when I was working on that project, I found 3 scientists in White Rock that were still alive that had worked there in the 50s. And they came down and, they had so many stories of what went on there. And they talked about, where things were located and, so make sure we were sampling in the right areas. So we finished that campaign, and I think we proposed it for no further action. I don't know if it's still what happened with it since I left. So I just thought that would be a bit of trivia or interesting historical campaign. So that's all I have. Let's see what's next on the agenda. I'm a little discombobulated here because I couldn't get my iPad to work, so I couldn't get the agenda up. Can you help me out here, Bridget? What's next on the agenda?
New business.
Yeah, I don't have any new business. Does anybody on the cab? Okay, so we can move on.
Yes, and it'll be the update from NMED. Do we have NMED available? Caitlin, I saw that you were online. Is JD going to be joining us for an update?
Yeah, from my understanding, JD was supposed to be joining and giving the update today, so I can try to ping him real quick on that.
Hi, Bridget. This is Danielle. I'm joining from my phone
Now I
because
got it.
whatever reason my computer does not want me to join WebEx.
Thank you for joining.
Did
We'll
any,
wait just a couple minutes to see if JD can join.
did anybody have any questions about the Bio Canyon? Okay, thank you.
I do not, Beverly, but that was all very interesting, and thank you for sharing.
JD just let me know he's logging on now and should be on shortly. But if he doesn't come up, I can give the update for him.
It just came up, so I think he's online now.
Okay, great.
Yes, sorry about that. My apologies. How's everybody doing today?
Doing well, thanks. Hope I was well also.
Right. Apologies, my having a little bit of computer issues on my end. Chair, board members, thank you very much for the invite. Yeah, I'll just dive right in and provide the update. Starting off with LANL for the consent order, just kind of reminding that, NMED and DOE, we signed that SL agreement and executed a modified consent order in 2024. DOE did submit the first proposed appendices for A, B, and C under the modified consent order June of 2025, and we finalized the FY26 appendices on October 10th. We are actively talking with the facility, and they have a submittal for the FY27 proposal that was due in the summer, and I have negotiations with that. But we've already started preliminary discussions between myself and designated agency manager. Moving on to groundwater. Simmer 3 is in the well development phase. That started March 6th of 2026. Post-development samples on the lower screen were collected on March 14th. NMED did collect split samples on that. Those are being sent for analysis and preparations for collection of development samples for the upper screen. That's currently underway. Let's see, on February 11th, just to note, NMED did issue an administrative compliance order on a set of violations of the consent order regarding LANL's management of the hexbait and green plume. That's in that process, right? Moving on to corrective action documents for MDAC, there was also on February 11th an administrative compliance order issued that related to the violations regarding a deferral of the MDAC from an active remedial site, just deferring it out. And so that essentially delays the cleanup of an approximately 11-acre unlined landfill. But that is also in that process. Yes, was there a question? I'm gonna keep on going here then. Moving on to permit-related activities. Moving on to permit-related activities, the LANL hazardous waste permit renewal application was submitted on July 10th of 2025. It's administratively complete. It was determined administratively complete on September 9th. And we've received fees and are currently reviewing the technical comments for that package. With regarding to the temporary authorization for the fat wax, those were, as previously stated, those were successfully vented and moved to WCS in November. March 3rd, NMED did receive the permittee's compliant closure letter, and we are reviewing that for completeness. That would be basically closing up that temporary authorization. Additional enforcements, just letting everyone know that in January 2026, the Enforcement and Compliance Division performed an inspection of the domes at TA 54, addressing legacy waste and conditions of those containers over there. Again, that was out of the Compliance and Enforcement Division. Moving over to WIP, some information. The agency is doing an agency-initiated modification to the WIP permit, essentially to provide language to help facilitate the prioritization of legacy waste and also the prioritization of LANL legacy waste. Also, there was new information received that the WIP panel 12 is no longer to be available in the current WIP permit term, which will end in 2023. Panel 12 is now anticipated to come online as late as 2035. Both of those were items that were approved during the WIP permit renewal negotiations to have those within this permit renewal. So this is new information that is going to extend beyond the current permit duration. So we are working through the agency-initiated permit modification. The draft is expected to be issued by the end of April, and have a public comment period opened up for that. Other WIP permit actions, we have a Class 2 permit modification request. There'll be a public pre-submittal meeting taking place from taking place on March 24th from noon to 2 p.m. at the Skeen Whitlock Building in Carlsbad, and it will also have a Zoom option for online attendees. This Class 2 PMR, it's proposing to revise the reporting frequencies and clarify reporting periods associated with both the volatile organic compound and groundwater surface elevation reports. Is also going to incorporate groundwater surface elevation into the annual Calibra groundwater report and delineate reporting periods associated with the water level monitoring reporting periods. It is also going to revise the mine ventilation rate monitoring report from permit part 4 and permit attachment A2, and will remove permit attachment O, which is the mine ventilation rate monitoring plan. That's part of that Class 2 modification that will again have the public pre-submittal meeting on March 24th, 2026. Upcoming WIP audits and generator sites. We have Idaho National Lab. We'll have audits on March 23rd. Oak Ridge National Lab is scheduled for April 20th. And Los Alamos National Lab is the week of May 18th. And then moving on to the WIP shipments up to date from last calendar year, January 1 through December 31, 2025, there was a total shipments of 441. Though that total is broken down to 276 shipments from Idaho National Laboratory, 102 shipments from LANL, 52 from Savannah River, 8 from Oak Ridge, 3 from Argonne National Laboratory, and no shipments last calendar year from Lawrence Livermore. So the WIP did extend their maintenance outage that started in January 5th, 2026. It is scheduled through March 13th, 2026. Shipments resumed the week of March 1 to the website. For this calendar year, January 1 through March 13th reporting period, there's been 7 total shipments. And again, this is during the WIP extended maintenance outage. And so there's been 7 total shipments, 3 from Idaho National Laboratory and 4 from Los Alamos National Laboratory. And that pretty much concludes my update. I'll go ahead and pause for any questions.
Well, thank you, JD. Not seeing any questions. Must have been very thorough. Thank you.
A lot of information.
Yeah, it is. Thank you very much. Some more people on the cab were able to join us. Can you introduce yourselves, please?
This is Sterling Grogan. I'm a cab member from Santa Fe.
Hi, Sterling. Okay, thank you. Moving on, the next item is an update from the EM Los Alamos Field Office, Jessica Kunkel.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So great to see you all at this CAB meeting this afternoon. I want to start with just a couple quick updates before I get into some of the EMLA updates. And then just to make sure level set expectations here, Brad Smith, the president of N3B, will also be giving updates. So I'm going to keep my updates targeted to a few select topics, and then Brad Smith will supplement with some of the key updates on legacy cleanup activities on behalf of us. I wanted to share with the Citizens Advisory Board that I have been selected to participate in the Deputy Secretary's rotational program for senior executive service members. So while I am on rotation, we have Dr. Stanley Pieram, who is online today, who will be acting as the Environmental Management Los Alamos Field Office Manager. Hopefully Stan can come on camera and wave. We're just gonna let him wave today. He'll give us some introductory remarks at the next Citizens Advisory Board meeting. He and I have been working very hard over the last few weeks to bring Stan up to speed. He is joining us from our environmental management Savannah River site in South Carolina. So he's not new to DOE, but he is new to New Mexico and new to Los Alamos. But he's hitting the ground running, and he and I are jointly committed to making sure that we provide continuity of leadership during this transition period. So I'm really looking forward to all of the good things that Stan is able to do while he's with us. Just a quick update. Some of this is going to be a little redundant with some of the updates that Mr. Nance provided. He always does a great job being so thorough with all of the updates from the New Mexico Environment Department. On the hexavalent chromium plume interim measures, our interim measures do remain turned off. You may recall that in response to direction that we received from the New Mexico Environment Department on November 18th, 2025, we had received direction to cease injection, and in response, we did have to shut down the full interim measure system, including extraction and treatment. That still remains off. Mr. Nance provided a great update on what's going on with regard to our Simmer 3 well. That is our next well, or the current well drilling activity, to add a new monitoring well to our network of monitoring wells. We should be completing the full installation activities and transitioning to our monthly sampling program later this year. And then we will be transitioning and quickly mobilizing on our next well drilling activity, which is a well called R80, which will be another monitoring well to allow us to continue the characterization for the nature and extent of the plume. We did receive 3 administrative compliance orders that were issued by the New Mexico Environment Department just last month. 2 of those were on the hexavalent chromium campaign, and 1 was on material disposal area C. We did file our official responses to those administrative compliance orders just this past Friday. Those responses are posted, I believe, on the New Mexico Environment Department website as well as the EMLA website. So you can look those responses up there, and we could potentially make those links available to anybody who's interested. We did also, for awareness, just yesterday initiate technical dispute resolution with the New Mexico Environment Department regarding 2 topics. The first was the applicability of the consent order to the New Mexico Environment Department and its bureaus. And the second topic was NMED's direction from November 18th, 2025 to cease all injection operations associated with the DP 1835 permit for the chromium interim measures. The last update that I want to provide from an EMLA perspective is that we are continuing to make very good progress with the preparation activities for the demolition of the excess process contaminated facility that's called the ion beam facility. Folks may recall this is an excess facility that was built to support activities, particularly during the Cold War era. It's been access to the NNSA mission need for about 26 years now. So we have a prime contractor, Aptum Federal Services, that's been working to prepare the facility and the site for those demolition activities. And we are currently on track to to mobilize with the actual facility demolition later this year. We're really excited about the progress that team is making, and we're really looking forward to being able to show you some of the progress of the demolition as that project commences later this year. And with that, I am done with my updates. I'm happy to take questions now, and I'm also happy to take questions during the public Q&A session.
Jessica,
Yes.
this is Steve McLaughlin. I had a quick question. Are both your responses to the compliance orders related to the plume as well as the compliance orders themselves both posted on the NNMCAB website?
I believe the administrative compliance order should be there. I do know that our responses are there because we verified that those are posted there. Maybe if there's somebody on my team, we can just get a confirmation, or even Mr. Nance could potentially confirm if those administrative compliance orders are posted on the NNMCAB website. But we can make those links available to the CAB members if that would be helpful.
It would. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Yep, we can do that.
I'm checking right now to see if those are posted.
Yeah, thanks, JD. I did just get a message from one of my team members saying they are, but I know we've heard from folks that it can be a little tricky to find them, so maybe we'll provide the hyperlinks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And if you are able to find that, JD, feel free to. I think you can put it in the chat here too, and folks can snag it there.
Any other questions for Jessica?
One more, Jessica. Do you have an update on the total accumulated cost of dealing with the plume yet? Up to date?
Total accumulated cost. I do not have that number. Would love to take that for action.
That would be helpful. I remember a couple of years ago we were told something like 168 million, but I would like an updated number if that's possible.
Yep, we'll take
Thank
that
you.
for action.
Well, thank you for that update, and we all wish you lots of luck on that program. We're going to miss you.
Thanks, Beverly.
Okay, we're moving right down through the agenda very quickly. We have next an update and look ahead from N3B, Brad Smith, the President and General Manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also want to wish Jessica all the luck in the world. To be chosen for those types of programs is a real honor. And we will stay in touch. As she said, she will be upstairs when she's not in DC. And I'm looking forward to hearing her stories. And we've had lots of discussions with Dr. Stanley Piram. Stan has met many of my executives and some of our workers on the floor, and everyone's excited to carry on with Stan and what he's doing. Of course, EMLA and their staff, we've got our partners are very much in this mission with us. So again, best of luck to Jessica on her journey. So we usually start out with safety, and I want to say that right now, I'm quite pleased with where we are regarding our injury rates and our safety culture. The workforce continues to really take their time with planning and understanding the work that they're doing. The injury trends are decreasing, and we are doing very well. Every year we continue to improve, and some people on my staff are always leery of me saying things like that because it's like jinxing it. But, you know, you also have to celebrate when your workforce is engaged and trying to do the best they can, because the safer we are, that also protects the public and the environment during our mission work. And there's a saying, the practice makes perfect. We participated in the annual LANL emergency exercise on February 23rd. There were lots of opportunities for us to work with Triad and the coordination, and we did what was called a hot wash. I know some of the CAB members have participated in those, and it's certainly helping to strengthen what we're doing in coordination with Triad, and every year we get better at what we're doing. So that was really a good response working with Los Alamos County and others in the Joint Information Center. So hopefully at some point we can get a little more information on that to share, but it was a success. We're making great progress on shipping waste off site. We've completed 32 transuranic shipments to WIP in the first quarter of FY26. And we have, WIP was down for a little bit to conduct some of their preventive and corrective maintenance in the mine. And they have resumed WIP shipments as of March 10th. We are well on track to exceed our goal of 40 transuranic waste shipments for 2026. And that doesn't always tell you how much waste we're shipping. And in the first quarter, we shipped almost 130 cubic meters of waste from Los Alamos down to WIP. And in total, let's see, I've got another number that just came in. If I include low-level waste for permanent disposal, we've dispositioned 740 cubic meters, which is roughly 65 trucks of loaded concrete, just to kind of give you a metric. And again, Jessica's challenged us, me and my team, and we're taking the challenge so that we can continue that shipment. And as another part of that, central characterization program out of WIP is really helping us quite a bit. So those will remember that we did the corrugated metal pipe campaign. We have characterized now almost 50% of those corrugated metal pipes. And that's great news because that gives us a backlog to maintain a production schedule, if you will, for those shipments. We will talk a little bit now about progress on our new monitoring wells. Our contractor has completed Simmer 3 well construction on March 5th. And we are just completing well development. And we know that Simmer 3 is going to provide additional data on the chromium plume, which will aid in the determination ultimately of a permanent solution. The other good news is Boart Longyear, who is our well drilling contractor, has begun mobilizing equipment for monitoring well R80. And Jessica also challenged us with this, and I want to thank NMED and the Office of State Engineer for helping with our drilling work plans. But the more of a backlog we retain, I don't have to go into competition with the oil and gas industry to retain our drillers here. So that's great news. Looking forward, option period 2, we are preparing to enter at the end of April. Now, for those that don't remember, there was a base period, 5 years for N3B. We are ending option period 1, which was for 3 years. And now we're getting into the final 2 years of the contract. And we continue to do resource evaluations. We appreciate the community support as we do this. One of the things that people may have heard is that the skill set reviews that we've been doing for our workforce, we evaluate every year. We did have approximately 16 people out of the 650 that were impacted. We have been able to place through reskilling them into other positions. So that was great news. And in addition, we are, to promote stability in the workforce, we're continuing to do leadership development, project management, coursework, other things that engineers and accountants, everyone here now has a personal development plan so that we can look forward to whomever takes over the contract, that they have a solid basis to do their work and have a very high functioning workforce. One of the last things, and you always like to close on a high note, and we want to talk about our partnership with our area communities and our desire to be good corporate neighbors. Since the inception of the contract in 2018, we've awarded almost $3 million in contributions to improve the lives of communities in northern New Mexico. And this in 2025, we did approximately $333,000. But more importantly, we are also working in concert with LANL and their education outreach to the various schools and community colleges and major universities in and around not just New Mexico, but other states, so that we can maintain a viable workforce. But we are at N3B, we don't need all the PhDs and what I'll call, many of the engineers. It's not that we don't desire them, but we have more apprenticeships with the craft. We meet quarterly with the Albuquerque unions and their business agents and business managers. We welcome that. We're working quite a bit with Northern New Mexico College. Hector Balderas has been great. So we're looking forward on how we can reinforce all of the STEM education, but also what we can do in health and human services, art and culture, civic and community programs, because all of those allow a broader population of the workers or the potential workforce in northern New Mexico, particularly around Espanola. We have increased our awareness and outreach there. Many of our nuclear operations staff and environmental safety, health, and quality come from the Albuquerque area. And those that are, when they say dedication, when you have a 2-hour drive one way and these people continue showing up for work every day, is a real testament that they are committed to the mission and they want to do the best job they can, because we talk about every day we make the environment a little bit better, and they have a direct impact on in the outcome of that. We also last year had approximately 4,000 hours in nonprofit organization volunteer work. And I'm proud of that because, again, back to giving to the community, it helps those that live there and also support those communities. And going forward, we're going to continue pledging that support. And I was looking at one other thing that somebody was trying to send me. It didn't come through. I apologize. We have IT issues here today, so I'm on my phone. But that said, I truly appreciate the partnership that we have with the MLA and the communities. NMED, you don't always agree, but as long as we have the ability to discuss, we will arrive at the right answers over time and be wise stewards of the money going to cleaning up the environment. So that is a quick update. We've had a few others that have happened with the cleanup forums, et cetera, but I want to open it up for questions now so that I don't take up all the time and we can get through the CAB important agenda.
Sterling?
Thanks, Bridget. Brad, thank you for your presentation. And I just have a question. What is a hot wash?
So think at the end of let's say you're doing a job at the end of the day and everybody gets together to discuss what went well and what can you improve on. That's basically it.
Oh, okay.
So you bring everybody together because we all have different viewpoints on what we saw. Jessica and I were in Santa Fe at the Joint Information Center and the policy group, which has a very different look from anybody at the Emergency Operations Center or who might be on scene. And so the idea is, again, hey, is what I saw accurate? And sometimes it really just takes a discussion because your point of view may not have all the information needed. So you end up with a skewed opinion that others can help you understand rightly or wrongly and make the next response. Because at the end of the day, these drills are, should a response be needed, particularly in fire or other things, we want to be as timely and as responsive from a technical support standpoint as we can. And those hot washes really help us do that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else have a question?
Brad, this is Patricio.
Oh,
I just got a hope all is well. Good to see you. Thank you for the great presentation. Just got a quick question on your shipments. Your progress is amazing. I was reviewing your update, and I see for FY 25 you had 43 shipments. This Q1 you already have 32. Do you plan on keeping up with that pace?
To the extent we very
Of
much so.
Okay. Wow. So looks like we may triple the progress from FY 25.
It is possible, but as we are coordinating with Triad as well. We have an at-ready agreement with WIP for LANL shipments, and that's what we were going to do. So we are looking at upwards of 5 shipments a week that LANL has said that if they have nothing to ship, we can fit that in. Ellen Gammon, who many of you know, is well stuck into WIP and the Central Characterization Program. And so she's on the weekly call with them to be able to coordinate what we need. And very much, again, back to Jessica challenging us to maintain a pace. Our workforce has taken it up, and fingers crossed, we're going to keep shipping and keep characterizing. And that won't be the only waste that we do corrugated metal pipes. We also have some other waste drums that we are dealing with right now, what's called drill and drain, that you start out with a parent drum and go to what are called daughter drums. So you might have one drum that creates 1, 2, 3, or 4 other drums. And each one of those is a volume of waste that we have to dewater and or remove the liquids. And once that is done and it meets the WIP waste acceptance criteria, those are also going to be part of these shipments. So it isn't just corrugated metal pipes, but we're doing other above ground waste, true waste, to get to WIP.
Wow. Great. Just a quick simple question, Brad. Has the weather played in favor of helping with all those shipments?
So this is a double-edged sword, Patricio, because yes, it has helped. But on the flip side, it's been so dry that we all know northern New Mexico can have a fire issue. So we actually have gone out and done what I would call normal springtime vegetation control. We've started early to make sure that we can maintain not only the safety of our work area, but also continue those and support those shipments.
Great. Thank you for that update. Keep up the great work, Brad.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
I had a quick question for Brad. Can you tell us how much legacy, what's the volume of legacy true waste left over to ship to WIP now?
Can I get back to you on that number, Beverly?
Sure.
I'm writing a note to myself.
Okay. Any other questions for Brad? Oh, seeing none. I want to thank Brad for that update. We appreciate that. And that it is phenomenal that you made so many shipments. I just had to say that. A lot of
it takes a village. I mean, truly, between the support we've gotten from EMLA, from Triad, WIP, and the Central Characterization Program, everybody has really leaned in to make sure that we get priority to ship.
That's fantastic. Okay, since we're so far ahead, we would like to take a break. Bridget, when should we resume?
Let's just take a quick 10-minute break and then come back.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to work on my iPad while we're on the break. Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, we're ready to resume. We have a presentation by Scott Muggleton, LANL Legacy Cleanup Corrective Action Process for Affected Areas. And Scott is the N3B RCRA Remediation Program Director. Scott.
Hey, hi, thank you. Can people see, well, first, can people hear me? Like Brad said, we're on an IT issue situation here, so I'm at my phone. And then first, so thanks for the opportunity. Also first time with the CAB. I haven't been in this position too long, but I think my bio went around, so I've been around, and I can actually follow up on the bio story, actually, Beverly. So
Great.
when I first came here, you know, and it was in 2009, after I finished school at UNM. Hi, JD. It's been a minute since we've seen each other, but I was on some drilling program, you know, some drilling, some wells as a geologist and some vapor wells. But the first soil cleanup I did was some focused final cleanups in Bio Canyon. So there's some final soil removals. We even had to scrape part of a boulder off. And so, yeah, I was, and then I would go down there, kind of a safety thing. I would go down there running, some big runner, and go down the trails with some friends. And the gates are no longer there, but there used to be a fence around this area, as you mentioned, and a tree fell on it. And so on one of the road that's there, you could get through it, right? And so everybody would try to go through, and I'd be like, what are you guys doing? Literally I had some heavy equipment right there, and I was like, what are you guys doing? Like, we should go around. There's a gate with signs, right? And we're running, right? Like the point is to run. So, you know, a little diversion is bonus, right? So yes, that was one of the first things I did was some final focused removals in bio.
That's great.
Yeah. So welcome. Thanks. It's been a while since I've given a presentation, so bear with me, and hopefully everything is okay technologically on my end. But yeah, so we're going to go through the corrective action process for aggregate areas. And you know, as we're doing that, to look at the LANL legacy waste cleanup in Los Alamos. So next slide, please. So this graphic, we're going to focus on the center. So we're cleaning up the land in the presentation. And yeah, I know a lot of folks obviously probably are pretty familiar with some of the content and some of the material and definitions, but so bear with me. But we are here to clean up the land, and you know, whether or not it was intended, I think the graphic is a great display of the interconnectivity. So while we're cleaning up the land, we're also being protective of the water quality, obviously with surface water runoff, and the ability of the rainwater to, you know, go through the vadose zone. We are contributing to the protection of the water. And believe it or not, we also ship soil off the hill, so we contribute to a lot of those, the volume of shipment periodically. You know, it's true, most of our work is soil sampling, so we don't usually contribute a significant volume of waste, but when we do have to soil remediate and remove the soil, we are containerizing and shipping that contaminated material off the hill to offsite. So a quick table of contents for this presentation. We're going to go through some definitions, some of the framework that we use, the flow of the process, and then get into a little bit of data, not like true numbers, but kind of how we look at the data, and then end up with some of current work, ongoing work, and a little hint at some of the future stuff coming up. So next slide, please. And these next couple of slides are a little wordy, but I'll try to summarize so we don't have to read all of this or be read to. But, you know, we are facilitating the legacy cleanup at LANL through the consent order as NMED regulates the RCRA the RCRA corrective action process. So try to be better about acronyms. Obviously we all know NMED, and then the Resource Conservation Recovery Act is RCRA. But in that exercise, we need to break up the area of LANL into manageable parts so that we can address, the corrective action process, do our investigations, and move through our remediation if that's warranted. And so we break them up into areas called aggregate areas. That's simply a section of the geography here where within a watershed or within a canyon or part of a canyon, we have at least one SHMU or AOC. And so those are solid waste management units and areas of concern. Cutting the chase, when we go out into these units, and there's a variety of them with respect to, firing sites or drain lines, storage areas, outfall, septic tanks. So all of those are either a SHMU or an AOC, and we end up, doing our investigation and not really worrying about that distinction once we're in the field doing the data collection. So probably from this point on, we're not really going to, I'm not going to be trying to split hairs on those distinctions, but the bottom line is those are potential release sites, right? For some reason, whether something was stored there or there's some reason to consider the fact there might be a potential release or spill, those get defined as and categorized as either a solid waste management unit or a AOC, area of concern, and a cluster of those becomes an aggregate area. And that's where we sort of parse out our work packages, what work we're doing. And those, if you go to the next slide, please. I don't know if the deck dropped off. But this next slide has more words, so I can keep going while it comes back up. But our aggregate areas are then also, we're able to lump those into bigger areas that are called campaigns. And those campaigns, with the list of their subordinate aggregate areas and the number of SHMUs and AOCs are, listed in the consent order available, online. Appendix C has that that list and categorization. We also, not only do we have the RCRA as far as a regulatory driver, but we also do work with the Environmental Protection Agency under TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act. And that is typically if we're looking at PCBs. So when we do our investigation and there are polychlorinated biphenyls, I had to read that, but it is, we end up then meeting with the EPA and have various plans that go through them for approval when we're doing remediation regarding PCB contamination. So that's the next slide. Yep, thank you. And then we can move to the next one. So get rid of a lot of the words. So we have a nice map which shows an overview of LANL and adjacent areas. Coming right up. And all of these are our aggregate areas. So the shaded pastel colors, each one of those is individual aggregate area. Bio's in there, kind of to the north, and 2 Mile, you can read them all. And then various parts of these get organized into the campaigns, and we can address groups of these for various reasons. The ones to the north obviously are up against town site, and so that's a high priority. And other bordering aggregate areas often are also high priority, and we deprioritize some of the sites that are maybe deeper into Los Alamos, into the lab. But again, the purpose of this is to conduct our corrective action processes and actions, and ultimately for the aggregate areas, we are looking at soil investigation, soil and debris removal, all driven by the ultimate data analysis of, is there any potential harm to human health or the environment based on current and future land use criteria. So that's kind of the framework and the setup when we go to these areas. What is our, what's our goal with respect to the land use? And as you can imagine, Bio Canyon and the town site areas, Pueblo Canyon, Upper LA Canyon, those have, the concern of folks living there with residents. And then when you're into the heart of the laboratory, that land use is, and we'll get to some of these details later, but that's an industrial land use, and those comparisons and those determinations of whether we need to collect more samples or remediate are based on those factors. So next slide, please. So when we're out there, we're also concerned about the time that the potential, legacy contamination, legacy waste could have been released. And so we are looking to the timeframes of the Manhattan Project and the Cold War era, and we are focused on the materials such as the soil, the rock, volcanic tuff, surface water and sediment, because that's of course where we interact, where as workers, if we're doing construction, we interact there, whether we're in our basement, if we have a basement, of course. And so all of those are the focus of our investigations. That's the material we're taking. That's what the picture is. So this is one of our aggregate areas, Starmer Upper Palrito. And these are a couple of folks collecting a hand auger sample. It's nice to see snow. Wish we still had some, of course. But so this is, this is in action. What we're doing 9 times out of 10 is hand augering and collecting our investigation samples. And this is really what we are focusing on for the framework of our investigations, is to determine what may or may not have been released in these areas as we march through all of these aggregate areas and campaigns. So next slide, speaking of campaigns. So this is a table that, will look pretty similar to some of the information on the consent order and Appendix C. This is to start giving a sense of the order and the quantity and the status of these campaigns. So, as you can see, there's over 900 SHMOOs and AOCs that make up all various campaigns. That's what the words are here. And within those are the aggregate areas. So this is, again, just trying to, I know it's sometimes hard to, have a feel for what does 900 SHMOOs and AOCs really mean, but that's how these are organized, as we were saying before, in order for us to be able to prioritize and organize how we approach the legacy cleanup. Going to the next slide, please. We have a couple of flow charts in the next couple of slides. This is going to be a simplified overview of the corrective action process as dictated by RCRA. So this is like the 30,000 foot view, right? And we go through our work plan, then we do our investigations and implement the work plan, write the report based on the data results, have our recommendations and conclusions, and then when the sites are considered and agreed upon, and there's consensus that they are complete, then we request of completion, COCs, from NMED. Obviously, there's a lot more details. The next slide is going to show all of those. The one thing that some people might be missing in here, if you're familiar with some of these slides, if they've been shared before, or the RCRA process in general, is due to the pretty simplified nature of the aggregator work, meaning our corrective action, if we determine there is a risk to human health, is to remediate the soil. So we, remove it, containerize it, ship it off site. So what is not involved, since it's so simple, what's not involved is things like CMEs, statement of basis, selection of the remedy, so the corrective measures, evaluation report. So all of those other steps that you might think belong in a RCRA process, you're right. But in this particular case, this is a very simplified corrective actions process focused on aggregate areas. So next slide, please. So here's a little more detail. So maybe a 15,000 foot view. So we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner and kind of snake our way backwards S through. And the greens are EMLA N3B activities. And then we show the coordination, collaboration with NMED as we move through the process. So I'm going to kind of zip through this because all the future slides are going to drill into the details. I'm going to stop at one of these arrows to kind of give a little more detail. But so a repeat, we start with our work plan. We then submit that to the NMED for their approval. And a lot of these dates and actions are all defined in the consent order process. Then we skip right through one arrow right to conduct our investigations. And where I want to stop is this arrow and really emphasize that a lot of work goes into the preparation for the project, the preparedness. A lot of our conduct of ops is defined here. So when we know where we're going, what we're up against, what our goals are for the field work, we really have to make sure we have all of our safety documents, our quality documents. We've, potentially put a proposal out for subcontractors. I've been a subcontractor here for two N3B and LANs for 15 plus years before I moved to N3B. So they're vital for us to complete this work. So we have those folks that we get on board. We go through all of our preparedness with all our safety, quality. And to me, when I've done this with newer hires that are going to become field geologists, I really want to emphasize that there's like two sides of the coin, right? One is collecting our investigation samples, and that's really important. You got to go to the right depths. You have to know the geology to do the identification and description of the material. But on the flip side is the documentation. Like we have to show that we are, doing things with quality, doing things safely. We're meeting our data quality objectives, and so all this documentation is vital for efficiencies in writing the reports, evaluating the data, going through all of our oversight, just to be very transparent about how we did everything, and everything has met all of the standards that we're applying. And if we do that, from the beginning, we're going to be able to be very efficient in completing the reports and completing the work and preventing a lot of, unnecessary go backs. But really, that's a critical step that takes, a fair bit of time before we can actually get in the field. So I just want to take some time to call that out and make sure that it's, because this can be a pretty extensive process, as I'm sure people are aware, but it's not for nothing, right? Those are critical steps to take. Then we are collecting our data. We receive it, collecting our soil, sending it to an offsite laboratory, getting the chemical data back from the offsite laboratory. We're doing our data validations and getting it ready for our data analysis. So the next few slides are going to be a little more in depth with that, with this little square box right here. But between this evaluation and the risk assessment that's involved as well, that is where we determine whether we need more samples or we need to remediate based on, again, the land use and what our criteria are for, preserving, safety of humans and the environment. Then we get to write everything up, and I'll pause here for another second and kind of say that this process does not happen sequentially at every site, at every SHMU or AOC. So when we're at the very first site, and of course we have an aggregate area with 20, 30, 70 SHMUs or AOCs within that aggregate area, we have multiple teams that have various specialties. And so you are starting your process at one site, and then when you're sampling, then maybe that advanced team can go to the next site and start the setup of that next site. Or if there's permits that you have to get for that next site, utility permits, et cetera, then you're starting that process. You're doing your locations with your GPS to get to getting that next SHMU set up for sampling. And then when the first team gets done with sampling, then they move to the next site. And then of course you start getting the data in. And so we have, a huge amount of support and layers of the team that are more of the data analysis, the risk assessors. They're their own breed. They're very, knowledgeable and have a ton of training and are deep into statistics. And once they start getting those data back, then we're able to work through that and determine whether we, are done at the site, need more samples, need to remediate. And then if we need more samples, for instance, then we can kind of work back on ourselves, right? And we're already out in the field. So we can keep that going because we have all these layers of team members that are all vital to making sure that we're doing this continuously. And including writing the report. So the investigation reports, I'm sure folks have enjoyed flipping through the hundreds of pages when you download them. And those, of course, can be constructed on a SHMU by SHMU basis as we get to some concurrence internally that we have completed that work. I am going to ask to explain the COCs, the corrective the certificates of completion with or without controls a little bit later. That comes up a few times in this, but that is once we have the approval of the investigation report. So the important part about that is with the investigation report, we do make our recommendations. So we're recommending to the NMED, we have all of this, all these data, all this evidence, and here it is to show that we have completed, fully characterized the site, and there is no unacceptable risk to human health or the environment, and we're recommending, I'll be generic, we're recommending completion. Or we are recommending additional work needs to be done. And so then we move to the next yellow block, which is NMED has the time to review and approve the investigation report. Once all of that consensus is reached, that's where the full story is. All the evidence is in this. Again, it's a huge document, super transparent with gobs of data and maps and appendices, again, with tables upon tables. And I might have some trauma from helping build these tables for these reports in Word. That's not the most awesome thing to have a skill in, but some of us have it now. And you end up then getting to a place where we can then request certificates of completion for those individual SHMUs and AOCs of NMED, and then they have their review time to issue the COC, certificate of completion. So when we move to the next slide, we're going to get more into the data analysis. So we're going to remember the top right box, the evaluate data. That's going to be copy and pasted on the next slide, if you will, please. Okay, so have the folks that have collected the samples, we have the data back, and we have our team that's looking at it. So this is where we take all of our data, and the first step is one of two. We have to determine our nature, and we have to determine the extent of what we have back from the offsite laboratory. So the nature, if you remember back to the discussion of the sites, and the description of a SHMU and an AOC. And again, all of those are in the consent order defined, copy paste. But so you can refresh yourself. But for the nature, we have the broad time frame of the Manhattan Project and the Cold War, and the proliferation. And while there may not have been an intended use of an area, or we know there was an intended use, and we may or may not know whether there's a potential for a release. Determining the nature is to be protective is very important. So we actually have what we kind of shorthandly call a full suite of data. So that's where we're collecting our inorganic and analyzing for inorganic chemical compounds, organic and radionuclides. And inorganics will be your common metals, lead, mercury, barium. Organics, examples, semi-volatile organic compounds, volatile organic compounds. We also, again, in some of the sites, we have PCBs that we're sampling for, dioxins, furans, and high explosives, and the radionuclides. So we have, a huge amount of compounds to investigate, because we may not know exactly, even if we think we know what is out there at the site or the intention of the site, we're unsure about the ultimate potential for releases and unintended uses. So that's the nature. So then we get our data back, and again, on these tables that you see in the reports, sometimes there will be, they're not blank cells, they have a dash, an M dash in them, and they're defined. But what happens, of course, is sometimes the answer is null. Like there is no high explosive compound at this site. So that's kind of step one. And then step two is we run the inorganics because there's a background data set. So inorganic, again, the various metals exist naturally in the rock and the soil here. So there's a background study to do a background comparison away from the lab that says, okay, this is what is normally naturally in the rock. It's a range. So then you take your inorganic chemicals from your investigation data set, compare it to the data set of your background. And if it is above that, then it's not the same as background. And so that becomes, it's a statistical test. There's multiple statistical tests. And that becomes what we then call a COPC, so a chemical of potential concern. And because the organic compounds, of course, are not naturally occurring in the rock, then as long as those are detected, right? So if they're not detected, if there's a null, if they just don't exist there, then we've determined that that compound is not there. But if they're detected, then they become a chemical of potential concern, and so do the radionuclides. So that's the nature. And then we know we've focused a little bit on the compounds that we care about and are concerned about, and we have to determine the extent of those detections that are now COPCs. And so that's where your maps come in, and the plates. If the site is big or there's a lot of overlapping sites, overlapping SHMUs and AOCs in an area. So we display all of our locations. So you have all of your single point, discrete, like that hand auger hole, right? All those discrete locations around the area that you're investigating. And we display the data both vertically and laterally. So we're those guys were, and when they were sampling, of course, that most of that hand auger was buried. He was hunched over a little bit. And so they're down, 3-ish feet at that point, 3-4 feet. And so that's part of the work plan process, right? To have a great distribution focused on, like I was saying early on, some of these SHMUs, we're targeting drain lines and septic. So clearly those linear features that are buried, we're targeting a potential release from those pipes and bends and connections. So we are getting underneath them. And so we have a depth, and then so we have the targets of those. We have the distribution that is, covering this area, because of course all of these SHMUs together and how they interact, we're saying there's a representation of that aggregate area, and that's what our, we're assessing our investigation reports on. They're basically, each aggregate area has a report, and then you're saying, okay, this aggregate area with all of these SHMUs and how they're interacting is you have your answer for each one of them for that whole area. So then you're looking at that distribution via the map of the COPCs, chemicals of potential concern, both vertically and laterally, and you keep asking yourself, are the concentrations increasing with depth? Are they increasing away from, the feature or the COPC? And if the answer is no, then great. That means extent is defined. Decreasing trends, you've parameterized, bounded. You know that where the focus of your COPCs and the higher concentrations are, and the lower concentrations have been defined. That means no more sampling is necessary. If we do not have extent in either vertical or lateral defined, then we have to collect more samples. Once we have that defined, nature and extent defined, then we can move on to conducting our human health and ecological risk assessments. And so the next few slides are going to have a few more details about that. And I know there may have been previous presentations regarding some of the details. I am not a risk assessor. So if anyone asks a question, I will take note and get one to answer the question accurately. But we have as you can see here on the bottom blue bubble, there's the different scenarios for land use and for the type of worker that would be potentially exposed to the media, to the soil, to the rock. And so industrial, construction, residential, and recreational. And we run the top three all the time, and then recreational, if we're in a town site, which we have an upcoming project that will be looking at for recreational. And then recently we've also been doing recreational for the Manhattan National Park. So obviously folks that go visit that are recreating. So we evaluate for human health based on the those land use scenarios and the potential exposure of the workers and people that are related to that type of land use. And then the other one was ecological risk. So of course we're looking at whether there's any potential harm to ecological receptors, and by that we just mean the critters, so the earthworm, plants, and the things that eat the things, right? So you go up it, the small mammals, the birds. And so the ecological risk assessment is concerned about how those plants and animals uptake all of the material that might be in the ground. And if it's harmful to them, then that is another reason for us to perform soil remediation. So the next few slides are a little wordy, so I guess is it okay? I'm keeping going while the thing is loading, or at least it's loading for me. Oh, there you go. So the next slide would be great. And this is really just a recasting in a more easy to read format of that bottom blue box, where we're just trying to really determine, are there adverse effects to human health exposed to what we're investigating in the material and the media that we've been sampling. So I kind of sort of stated that in the previous slide, so we can move on. One more slide, please. And again, I encourage everybody, but if anyone has looked at our investigation reports, a majority of the text in the main body, as well as multiple appendices, sometimes are where all of the risk assessment information and analysis and discussion are presented. And that section of an investigation report is often as big or bigger than kind of our maps and kind of the list of all of our chemicals of potential concern and things like that, and our table. So the risk assessment section and appendices are just for full transparency and the ability to have anybody have access to the data and the analysis. It's great, but it's a lot. And so this slide represents sort of the summary level, getting to the point. If you look at the conclusions and the summary sections of the investigation report, you're doing these comparisons against what is an unacceptable risk level. Are you above, you know, your lifetime cancer risk? Are you above your hazard index? You know, et cetera. So above or below, if you're above, then there's almost certainly going to be a recommendation for some remediation. Interesting on the ecological risk, part of the ecological risk assessment is site visits by the eco risk assessors. And even though there might be, you know, copper common out here, a lot of firing sites, a lot of wire debris, we end up having ecological risks above this level. But clearly, if there are healthy trees, healthy plants, healthy wildlife, we do these assessments when things are active, then you can make an argument that, okay, this might be, you know, on paper, given where we sampled, you know, not ideal, but in reality, when you look at the site, you can you know, make the argument with, you know, alternate lines of evidence, that the site is healthy and clearly the plant is either loving the copper or is missing it. So so that's part of our assessment. And of course, again, it's reviewed and, you know, there's consensus. So so it's not like it's an automatic situation, but, you know, we do have a lot of, you know, healthy growth out there, whether or not the healthy growth of junipers is in everyone's best interest, but this time of year especially. But it, you know, that's an important factor to consider when weighing these decisions. So the last risk assessment slide, you can move to the next one, please. We talked a little bit about the different scenarios and the potential for exposures, and this slide just adds the detail of depths. So the residential and construction worker scenarios are, you utilize the data set for the full 10 feet that you have data. Of course, when we're writing the work plan, we're targeting minimum numbers of samples to be able to run all the statistics and make this argument. And of course, throughout the depths, when applicable, meaning like, you know, sometimes we're below a structure or a feature that is buried fairly deeply. And so those samples that are collected beneath that very deep situation, I mean, no one's going to be exposed to it, but we still need to characterize that site and determine if there's a release or not. But in this particular case, you know, when we're looking at construction and residential, we're looking at the 10-foot depth, and then due to the land use and how people interact with their environment and the material, you know, industrial and recreation is, you know, less deep. It's only to a foot. And of course, you know, the ecological is, you know, again, I'm not one of these folks, geologist, not even a biologist. So I'm assuming that 6 feet is a good depth for, you know, how deep things like earthworms and roots and such get to. Clearly around here, as most folks know, and certainly if you've ever tried to hand auger here, we typically do not have that thickness of soil. So you are in rock, and I guess that's a whole nother situation for critters to be able to utilize. So, but nevertheless, that's the depth that we utilize the data to run the risk analysis for. So this is, as we said before too, this is where we're going to make the step of recommending soil removal, remediation, because we've, you know, the answer to our risk assessment is there is an unacceptable level of human health risk for this scenario. Back to those numbers, it's above those numbers or not. And so this is where I was going to explain the certificate of completion with and without controls. So when this is the final step, you know, even if we have to do additional sampling and some remediation, then we rerun everything after we removed the, you know, offending material, if you will, and we rerun the risk assessments and rerun it if we have new information, of course, as well. And if we think we're complete, and there is if we think we're complete, so I'm going to use an example. So like on one of our recent aggregators we're working in, 2 Mile, that is in the heart of, you know, the laboratory. TA3 is going to be one of the sites we look at. Technical area 3, actually right next to the ion beam that Jessica mentioned earlier, the old ion beam building. That TA technical area 3 is the land use is industrial, but we run industrial, recreational, and construction worker. And so these are the scenarios, it's probably easier to explain it this way. If we pass industrial risk, meaning there's no adverse effects to humans, pass. But if there is adverse effect to humans based on residential, then the control, we're only evaluating against industrial because it's going to be LANL for a while. But if it does not pass recreational, then the control is do not build apartments. So that's kind of the, my simple way of kind of like understanding it as an example of a control. Clearly, if that land is then deeded back over in the far off future, and somebody does want to build apartments there, then they would have an unacceptable risk for residential, and they would be recommending soil removal, some kind of remediation to correct that. But for our purposes, because it was industrial, we still are complete based on industrial, but there are controls, meaning do not build apartment houses. That's one example to kind of illustrate what we mean by with or without controls. But those are recommendations in the investigation report and are repeated in the request for certificates of completion. And when you go back to the consent order and look at the appendices and we say, hey, we've completed this aggregate area, we've even maybe completed this campaign, you can look at a different appendices, Appendix A, and that's where it lists every single SHMU and AOC, and that's where you'll see the status. And at some point you'll see that move from certificate of, in investigation space to in corrective action space to the space where we are, we've recommended certificate of completion with or without controls. And then when the NMED approves that and approves the IR and we submit the request and they issue the COC, then that part of the consent order gets changed to reflect the current status. So that's where you can see COC with or without controls. All right, next slide, please. And we're done with at least that portion of our data analysis or discussion of data analysis. So going back to, remember the flow chart where I spent some time talking about getting out in the field to conduct the investigations. The next slide is a bunch of challenges that we typically have in aggregate area, and that preparedness step is where we really work hard to make sure that everyone is protected. And that's kind of the contrast here, right? I mean, we don't want to put the humans, ourselves, the environment in harm's way just to determine whether the contamination is going to be harmful to humans, right? So we got to do both. And so the challenges that we face, that we define in our work control practices, our safety documentation, how we go about, and how we are also interacting with the landowners, right? So we're usually in triad property, so we're going through operational control agreements. We're making sure that we have all of our permits, whether they're for endangered species or threatened species or archaeological sites. So we have permits for that. We have of course, our excavation permits, because even digging a hole or even like manipulating the ground for our purposes, to kind of get a working area, if you will, is considered ground soil disturbance. So we have to get various permits, excavation permits. A lot of the work we do also that I've done, so I've actually interacted and sampled in all of these situations throughout my career, with the exception, I've only been a manager when the National Park Service had that requirement became into existence, and we've had to have that level of oversight, but we always have oversight when it comes to archaeological areas and how we have to, either move our samples or have an archaeologist with us to make sure that we're sampling, sieving and making sure nothing is captured in our samples that needs to stay where it belongs. Beryllium and depleted uranium, of course, a lot of our areas are in again, I keep saying this way, the heart of LANL. And so we have the firing sites that we're looking at, and a lot of them have beryllium, and I've worked under the beryllium program, collected samples that way. And one of our upcoming projects we'll talk has almost all of these as a challenge. So it's kind of interesting. It's like not even an individual challenge. Like this is almost the challenge to work here, like all of these all at once throughout the year. And clearly, we wish there was a snow problem now, but as Brad mentioned, we're going to be, getting into a fire situation potentially, and then a site like this that you're seeing on your screen, becomes difficult to work in when there's fire danger. So the protocol to make sure that we're sampling without, we do it. So we have a lot of documentation and work control documents to make sure that we have enough water, secondary water, so that we can address things, no sparks. So hand augering, we can do it. But we have to take extra steps to be protective. So these are the challenges. One of the two other ones I wanted to mention that we didn't get on the list. One is kind of hinted at it with utilities and us looking at older usages of septics and drain lines. A lot of times newer drain lines are co-located with the older drain lines and they're active. So we're always usually using a hand method to access those pipes, expose them so that we can know where they are, get approval from our potholing plan to proceed and collect our samples without risking that infrastructure. And so the utilities and the pothole plans are a significant step to get ready to sample, and are usually before. That's what I'm saying, like that advanced team that goes out, like they may be getting this done so that we can go from one sample collection team to the next and just keep the sample collection team rolling. The other one, this site kind of illustrates well. This is South Ancho, and that particular SHMU, the order of operations, if I didn't explain that before, it's TA33. That's what the first two letters are. And then the rest is I actually don't know the answer. It's probably just some, ascending random, letter and number and letter combo. I don't know if there was ever any intent beyond just starting to ascend. But this is an underground chamber. It has some depth to it. I can't quite remember, maybe 60 feet, 80 feet. And we used a drill rig, a mechanical method to drill deep because, of course, hand augering that deep is pretty difficult. But as you can see with this terrain, we're actually pretty much standing on a small paved road looking northish. But, in order to get as deep as we needed to assess, what the chamber was used for. You wanted to go all along the sides and even below the bottom of it, of course, to see what was there. And you needed a drill rig, but this is flat. This is a mesa top. It's on a nice tip of I think looking north, you're going to see Ancho Canyon, and it's just you go out to the mesa tip, which is just to your right. Beautiful, expansive view of the Rio and Santa Fe and the Sangres. And so, yeah, some of the views are just amazing when we're out there working, but a lot of times we cannot, sorry, I got a little pop-up thing. Some of the time being able to use mechanical methods to collect samples is a privilege almost out there. It doesn't happen often. You saw those two hand augering. Driving in that terrain, especially when it gets wet or snowy, is difficult. And also, as you can see just to the right of this, there's a berm. So there's a chamber and there's a berm, and we sample that entire berm on top of it and through it. And by the time you go through it, a 10-foot berm, and the time you go through it, and then go into the actual subsurface of the ground level you see there, the normal ground level. You're talking 20 feet. And so, yes, through that type of material, you can hand auger 20 feet, but you have to, because you can't drive a drill rig up on top of that berm. So we are really, one of our challenges really is the terrain, and we're doing a lot of hiking with a lot of hand augering, pulling out collecting the cuttings as waste and the samples, and they get heavy when you have a full suite. And so you're doing a significant amount of hiking and moving around because the terrain is just not advantageous to the mechanical advantages that a lot of other sites on the complex and anywhere sampling. Like I grew up in northern New York. I know what soil and dirt is. This ain't it, right? And so it's it's very difficult terrain. And when you're sampling in normal soil, you have a lot more mechanical methods to your advantage. But this is truly, pretty laborious. And there's a lot of concern about making sure we're taking breaks because of the constant repetitive twisting motion of the hand auger. You really have to be very conscientious about worker safety. Okay, so those are the challenges. And so now we're going to move on and finalize here. And I think I got, another 10 minutes. Flip through a couple of examples of the work we've recently completed, kind of explain where we are in the corrective action cycle that we kind of showed, and then some upcoming work. So if we're moving to the next slide, that'd be great. So these are two aggregate areas. So this kind of shows you the tiers, right? So we have the Pajarito watershed campaign, the two aggregate areas, Starmer, and then 2 Mile Canyon, and then the number of SHMOOs and AOCs within each one of those. So these are two ongoing projects. We are in again, remember my parallel thing and the layers, and we're working in parallel and one team is going. So in this particular case, for 2 Mile aggregate area, the investigation report has been, submitted and recently approved by NMED. So we are getting ready to go for most of those SHMOOs. You can see on the very bottom, there's the 2 SHMOOs that have additional work. So for all but 2, we are able to now proceed in the near future with a step of recommending. The recommendations in the investigation report have been approved, and we will now issue a request for COC based on those recommendations, with or without controls. At the same time, those 2 SHMOOs in that same IR were recommended for additional work. And we have proceeded with additional work at one of the 2. And that's the one you're going to see some pictures of in a sec. And that was completed recently in January. And the other one, we have completed their PCB cleanups, and we have completed our additional sampling that we need. And we are getting ready to write our, they call it the self-implementing plan for the EPA, the TSCA checklist. So we have the data. We're going to get the data back this time next week. And then that should give us the full picture. And we're going to say, this is the areas we need to clean up based on the goals that we need to meet for regulatory goals we need to meet for EPA and for NMED. And similarly, in the Starmer project, we are about to submit the revision to the investigation report. So, right, we submitted the IR, NMED has some comments. We're about to, give them a brief on what our comments are going to be, and we'll formally submit the Rev 1 of the investigation report for Starmer up at Pajarito, and that is one of our goals for this year with NMED in Appendix B, one of our consent order milestones. And so that's forthcoming this summer, and we will also be addressing, and the report is recommendations for both the completed sites, and then we'll move on to corrective, asking for those COCs, corrective action complete request, and then we will also be working on the remediation that we've recommended and additional sampling at that one SHMOO. It's TA8004C. And so we're doing all of those things in parallel with the ultimate goal of, performing the necessary sampling and remediation to get to, the corrective action, or the corrective action complete. So that is kind of the upcoming work. I did put on here, and again, I still struggle with numbers. Like each one of those, we've had a couple of years in the field, and over, almost 7,000 samples collected to get to this stage. And, I think that's a lot, but it's really hard to express, just in pure numbers, and even time duration, how much work this really encompasses. But nevertheless, those are those numbers to be impressed with if you're inclined. But if not, then we will certainly be motivated to try harder next time. Okay, so that's kind of some recent work and how we're into the different parts of the corrective action cycle. So if the next slide is actually going to show this one particular example This is the SHMU TA3, so that's the first number is TA3, right in the heart of LANL. This is the ion beam, so that yellow. We're going to move to another map in a sec. That's a little better, but that yellow shape is the ion beam facility that Jessica was talking about. And we were sampling this. This was an outfall. The SHMU is literally the outfall. And when we did our work plan, so this is the work plan. This was our initial look at the area to define the nature and extent of the contamination. And you can see in the text there that we had some pretty decent hits of PCBs. So we recommended additional samples, and we were working on getting our work plan for the rest of the work, what we actually needed to do literally in the field to comply with the TSCA regulation, which in this case, because of the future land use is going to be another building, is what they call high occupancy. So there that sets the levels. So if you go to the next slide, we will show, this was the plan, and then we got our data back. And then the next step is what happened when we circled back on ourselves and did our recommendation, we did our recommended additional samples. And I will wait for the map. Everyone loves maps, right? So this is what it looks like, or looked like, as far as our data spread and where we were proposing to excavate to meet our cleanup criteria. And in this map, you can see a little better, again, depending on everyone's screen, maybe this is not going to pop out at you, but on the top of so again, that big yellow block with the text on top of it, that's the ion beam facility that are currently inside doing some decommissioning. And then the other yellow rectangle just to the north was the transformer pad, or is a transformer pad, pad's still there. And that green line that's kind of trending east-west, and in the center, just above that, the transformer pad, which is the smaller rectangle, that green triangle is literally the outfall. You'll see it kind of, there's signage on a picture upcoming here, but that is where that's the SHMU. That's where we focused our sampling, and then we've had to expand it as we kept stepping out and just determining that there was a fairly widespread area of PCB contamination for sizes like that. The scale there is like only 50 feet. So this whole area where you see all the samples is maybe, I don't know, greater than a tennis court, but smaller than like a high school football field. Like, it's a pretty tight area. And then even though it looks like there's some space to the west, to the left, it is, you quickly have a fence and you're into, kind of wilderness, right? So there's a fence, and then there's a slope a down slope, and a lot of trees. So there's minimal accessibility here. And that is, that's the next pictures will show you kind of a better idea, but that's where we ended up. That was, one quick second on this one, and we'll move on, is if you look at the different colors, we had shallow excavation required because, again, we had the vertical and the lateral. So we knew how deep we were when we were below the levels of concern, right? So below 1 ppm in this case, we defined all of that. So you have your box of offending material. And this is also a waste minimization technique, right? You don't want to just clean up this entire area, especially if it's even a bigger area. I mean, we're confined here with infrastructure, but at the end of the day, this is a waste minimization method to really define and bound your areas to take out just what you need to. So then moving to the next slide are finally some nice field pictures, but those levels that those colors of those levels, the south was less deep, 2 feet. And then as you approach the outfall to the north, you were getting required to go deeper and deeper as we had defined exactly where the levels of contamination were trending to. So the upper left is to show you that very surgical and precise way that we dug to the proper levels. Then when you look at the bigger picture on the right-hand side, or most of the right side, that's showing that the shallower to the south, you're looking south there, you're showing, and that's the ion beam building right there in view. You're able to be backfilled so that we could work on top of ourselves, right? And then move to the deeper excavation because it's very tight. So you can see just to the right, there's almost no more room to work. And you're talking about multiple things of heavy equipment. We have waste containers. We have, you know, the way that we fill our waste containers, that we have to weigh the waste containers. So there's a lot. And then of course, you know, as Jessica said, Aptum is working there. So we're coordinating with them every day, or were. And then the final picture in the bottom left is just showing kind of the final filling of the deeper hole, that hole you're seeing with those crowd control barriers. That's the outfall, that little stick with the little placard on it. So that's literally where the outfall was. And so then we're just continuing to backfill after we've taken all of our samples. We did two quick things here. We did use a lot of laser technology to determine the depths and confirm that we got to the proper depths that we were supposed to. So we did not have to enter the excavation with a GPS or anything, nor use any other type of cruder technology. So we have a very accurate use of, you know, it's a common practice in a lot of cut fill situations to use some laser technology to record depths. And then we backfilled, and of course we're backfilling with dust suppression as always, and when we're sampling and excavating, but that's showing the dust suppression as we're backfilling that final deepest excavation down to 14 feet. And the last thing I'll point out on these pictures is if you look way in the distance in the bigger picture, just to the in between the building on the left and the excavator, you can see a blue cube. That is one of our waste containers. It's a super sack. And we ended up excavating here over 500 yards of cubic yards of material, over almost 200 of those sacks. Clearly, you cannot fit 200 sacks in that space. So we had an excellent collaboration with our shipping folks and friends at TA 54. And almost daily, as we accumulated those sacks, we would fill up a flatbed, move it to TA 54, pending their ability to ship it off site so that our site could remain clear and free of co-located work and safe and efficient. And we never had to stop because we overflowed the site with waste containers. But that was a clear problem here when you just don't have that much real estate to work on. And then the final picture slides are of what it kind of looks like almost today. Aptum has come in and put some stuff in there, but we've completed the backfill and all the restoration, closed out the SWIP, turned it back over to Triad when those pictures pop up. And if I have time, we'll go on the last two slides, but the last slide is what's upcoming real briefly. I mentioned, not on the slide, but I mentioned earlier that we have two work plans that were also goals to submit to NMED this year. One was approved and the other one, I think their review time, they owe us a response back here shortly for Pueblo Canyon, Upper LA Canyon. Those are Upper Los Alamos Canyon. Those are going to be in and around town site. We're kind of finishing up that historical property campaign. And Upper LA, I'll just make a plug. One of the other early projects I worked on, if you remember, around the Smiths parking lot and where Hotel 6 is and the old Trinity Bevco, that side of the canyon, we brought in a crane and a high angle excavator to collect our soil removal that was required on that project. And so that was, you know, a very, you know, interesting. I'm not going to say unique, but that was, you know, one of the abilities to do mechanical work that, you know, you can do mechanical work here, but it you know, might rise to that level where you're bringing in cranes and specialized excavation equipment. Spider excavators is kind of like articulated and kind of can crawl. It's technology that was invented like in the Alps and stuff to do construction. But anyway, so that happened a number of years ago. We're finishing up some of that work in Upper LA Canyon Aggregate area. But the next slide has a list of our other campaign that we're focusing on completing, which is the Southern External Boundary campaign, specifically the Patrio and Fence Aggregate area. And so we are going to be implementing our phase 2 work plan. We have, again, same kind of situation. We have additional samples to collect, and we put that into the previous investigation report as a recommendation. Now we have a new work plan, and we're going to implement that. And you know, the bottom schedules kind of goes through the fact that we have 9 schmooze and AOCs left in this aggregate area. We've already worked on 4 a couple of years ago, and we're going to be making progress against the remaining 5, both in sampling and then getting to the soil removal. So some of these sites in the phase 2 work plan, some of these schmooze in the phase 2 work plan, we already know we have elevated human health risk that we have to address. And so we've already recommended some remediation. So a lot of these samples are, again, abounding step out samples so that we're not digging up too much ground. But this area, if you go to the last slide, this area, the challenges, as I kind of hinted at, we kind of have them all. Each site doesn't have all of these, of course, but we are working within the weapons facility operations area, WFO, TA-15 and TA-36. And then, so they have a lot of ongoing mission. One of our sites, we're anticipating having to do weekend work because they're going to be doing too much experiments and shots throughout the week. So to be productive, we'll probably take, as much time as they can give us in the week and then the weekend. But we have, a couple of these areas have the chronic disease prevention program, beryllium chronic disease prevention program that we have to work under. And so that'll require a lot of safety, IH monitoring, industrial hygienists on site, and a lot of monitoring to make sure we have worker safety. And again, cut to the chase on that. Like, I've done this work in the PPE, and we've done the monitoring and proved, through negative assessments, that our work practices are very safe, and we control our dust, and so the inhalation hazard is usually, like, literally non-detectable. So we are doing an excellent job on that end. But it is sometimes difficult to work in that level of PPE. So we have to be careful there. DU, this is old. Some of these are firing sites that aren't being used. Sometimes we have to go in there because they want to reuse them again. So we have a kind of coordinated missions, if you will, right, where we want to get the sampling done for the legacy so they can turn around and start using it again. And then we also, in this particular case, have a little bit of spotted owl restrictions. It shouldn't really affect us because, again, a lot of our work is not really that noisy. But again, we go through the bio folks to get that approved. And then we're waiting on one, I think the one report for one archaeological site that I tried to sample when I was doing phase 1 on this project a decade plus ago. That report should be being submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office, in the very near future. And then in a little bit of time, we'll have that report back and be able to sample in that site. And that's all I have. Sorry for going over a little bit.
Thank you for that very thorough talk. Are there any questions? Sterling?
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Just one question is, are any of the places, the aggregate areas that you talked about, involved with the RDX material?
So yes, long story short, yes. From a surface perspective, the technical area 16 and those areas, we have done sampling in those areas, and and that's kind of one of the upcoming campaigns. So that is the Upper Watershed campaign would have those aggregate areas, Canyon de Valle aggregate area, and TA-16 and Upper Watershed, Upper Water aggregate area in the Upper Watershed campaign. That's horribly horribly named. So yes, short answer is yes. That area is part of a future aggregate area that we will be investigating.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I have a few questions, if I may.
Sure.
I never really understood aggregate areas because we originally started with schmooze and then came AOCs. And then all of a sudden there were, later on and I see they're schmooze grouped geographically, but when you go to propose a site for no further action, are you doing it shmoo by shmoo? Do you wait until you get all the schmooze in that aggregate area and then make a proposal?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the short answer is no, you don't have to wait for all of them to be complete, but you do have to go through the investigation report step submitted to the NMED and their approval, because that's where the recommendation is. So if you're recommending, and NFA is the old EPA kind of term, and so COC, certificate of completion is now under the consent order. But but point taken. So Neelam always like had a reaction to that whenever we said NFA. So I've gotten better about not saying that. So yes, as you probably saw, that I was trying to get to that point, but of course I was rushing towards the end, and there was a lot of words on that page. But for 2 Mile and Starmer, we recommended certificates of completion with or without controls for the vast majority of the schmooze within that aggregate area. And we also recommended additional work for 1 or 2. And so now that we have for 2 Mile, we recommended additional work for 2, and the remaining sites were for COC. So now that we have the approval of that IR with those recommendations from NMED, we can get COC, or I forget the number, for the some that were in there. So we'll ask for COCs for 60 of the sites, and these 2 sites that we're working on or worked on. So that one picture I showed in the last site I focused on, we've completed that site. So we're actually writing the completion report for the EPA, and we have proposed in our we call it like the 5-year plan. Appendix C will have an addendum to that IR, where then we will submit the results of those remaining 2 sites, those remaining 2 schmooze. And so then after that addendum of the IR goes through the approval process with NMED, we will be able to, in our recommendations for COC with or without controls, then we will be able to ask for those COCs to be issued. So yes, there is strategy of how big of an aggregate area and how many sites do you want to tackle before you can kind of get to this, get to the COC. So it is part of a strategy, but for the examples that we made, it's those were pretty large aggregate areas with, well, I shouldn't say large, right? They had a set, extent, but they had, 70 sites that took multiple years to investigate. But yes, almost at any point in time, there's nothing stopping anybody from writing an investigation report to date and submitting it. You're just trying to avoid doing that, too much. So it's definitely a balance.
Thank you. In the 90s, we developed background levels, and maybe even before that. And I was wondering, have those remained constant? Have those been reevaluated over time? Or
Yep. Hey, I'm gonna go off screen for a sec. I'll be right back. "1998 background study. Well used, still used." So it has not been, it has not changed. I forget, who gets credit for it, but that is the current background study for the various media, all the different volcanic units. Again, I got stories, and I'm happy to share them. I don't mind, but yeah, I ended up participating in a QBT4 background study. So again, QBT4 is just a designation we have for one of the layers of the rocks. And at the time when we were doing some work at TA49, it looked like the weather tough might be naturally deviating from the background study rock that was collected for that upper tough unit. And so we proposed a standalone study to see if the background was different in the weathered tuff that we were sampling at the surface. That's what we were seeing. It was noticeably, stained red, or not red, but orange and rusty and kind of brown. And so we were proposing that there was a higher concentration of some of the metals, because we were getting above background all the time. And so that was our hypothesis. Unfortunately, I did this study. Like, I was out there with, I don't know if you know the name, G'day Wold Gabriel. So he was a geologist at the lab, and so he was out there with me. and on the drill rig taking core, and but the background study was focusing on the unweathered part, and our argument was the weathered part was this closer to the surface, was going through that process and generating a higher level of metals than you would see that was supposed to be represented in it. So we tried, but the results we got verified this previous study. So no change since September of 1998.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if people realize how stringent a residential scenario is, because you know, it takes into account that you have some contaminated soil and somebody plants a vegetable over that spot, and or you know, in contaminated soil, and then eats that vegetable for I don't know how long, a year or so. And then what is the risk of cancer? I mean, it's really stringent, I thought, at the time. And so I was wondering about TA21, if you know much about that. Is that ever going to be proposed for residential usage? Do you know what's been decided about that? Or if anything has been?
So currently, TA21, I mean, it is a campaign, it is an aggregate area itself. And you know, it is on the list. But as far as future land use as it comes into the priority window, yeah, I think that answer is going to be forthcoming when the work plans are, you know, either updated or revised to get to that point. I don't know the answer, and I'm sure it'll be in negotiation. I mean, the interesting thing is, you know, kind of to your point, it's not uncommon for us to be able to recommend without controls, meaning it passes residential. Like that is, you know, kind of our first pass with these work plans is the nature. So is there contamination there or not? Because we don't have a crystal ball, we're not clairvoyant, we can't, you know, we don't have magic, gamma spec eyeballs or whatever the method is to analyze the chemicals. So we kind of just have to go in there with uncertainty and work with the data results that we have. And so, yeah, I think, you know, in a lot of cases without controls is obtainable because there is limited, chemicals detected above our levels of concern. But I would hate to predict what that would be for 21.
Scott, it's Brad. If I can help you, whenever that is done, we will be working with EMLA and that going back to NALA, and then at that point, the land disposition will be discussed. But right now, that is not on our horizon. Beverly.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I
Brad.
have a question from Sterling.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had my question asked and answered. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
I had one last question. What is the completion date for the ER program? Or is there one?
That would have to be another one that I get back to you and take that note.
Yeah,
I will
EMLA,
direct you.
Scott, that should be an EMLA question, not for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This is Kara at EMLA. I was going to jump in on that. We'll go back and take that under advisement and look to get you a more comprehensive answer. What I can tell you right now is that N3B's contract continues on for 2 more years, and so they'll be prosecuting ER work for that full time. And then we have to look at the end of the contract and see what's completed and where we are at that point. But we'll take that under advisement and get you a more comprehensive answer.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. That was really very thorough. Bridget, should we have public comment at 3:30, which we have to stick to. Do you want to give your update, a quick update, or do you want to wait until take another break, or how should we proceed, please?
Beverly, we're close enough within the 15 minutes that we can just go ahead with public comment.
Oh, excellent. Okay. So we are now in the public comment period. Are there any comments? I see Scott has his hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to thank everyone today for their presentations. And before I get started here, I'd like to especially thank Scott and Brad for their cleanup work that they do at the laboratory. And having said that, I would like to start with, my name is Scott Kovac with Nuclear Watch New Mexico. And Nuclear Watch New Mexico recently reviewed groundwater and samples taken during 2025 in LANL's public environmental database known as Intellis New Mexico. We found 533 cases of regulatory exceedances involving numerous toxic and carcinogens. In February 2026, the New Mexico Environment Department issued an administrative compliance order for civil penalties and for violations of groundwater standards concerning the hexavalent chromium plume. The lab had been ineffectively remediating the mile-long chromium plume ever since it was first discovered in 2004. Hexavalent chromium is a highly toxic carcinogenic compound that, if inhaled or ingested, can cause lung cancer, nasal ulcers, skin irritation, and organ damage. NMED assessed a total of $15.8 million in civil penalties and has required the Department of Energy to submit a revised work plan and is scheduled for approval. From 1956 to 1972, the lab used water containing potassium bichromate with chromium in it as a corrosion inhibitor in cooling towers. The contaminated water was discharged and untreated into Sandia Canyon, releasing as much as 160,000 pounds. Over a 3-year period ending in November 2022, LANL extracted and treated more than 4 million gallons of water, but only removed 680 pounds of chromium. At this rate, it will take more than a century to clean up LANL's threat to the regional groundwater. Groundwater contamination under LANL cries for greater attention and regulation, given the limited resources and increasingly arid in an increasingly arid state. Chemicals used to make high explosives for nuclear weapons have also reached the regional aquifer. DOE, Department of Environmental Management at LANL, started work in 2015 on a plan to clean up decades-old contamination of the RDX, the Royal Demolition Explosive sites. Contaminated surface soil was removed, but the RDX in the groundwater plume, nearly 1,000 feet below, remains. Several RDX standard exceedances are detected every year and repeatedly flagged by NMED. However, DOE's position is to definitely postpone cleanup, claiming that the RDX will not reach any drinking water supply wells until the year 2100 or 2100. DOE plans to just let it continue to leach into the environment, hoping the RDX will just go away. Perchlorates used in explosives for fuel rockets have also exceeded the groundwater contamination standards, and so has perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, which is also known as PFOS, also exceeded the New Mexico standards. Also, cleanup funding at Department of cleanup funding at DOE Environmental Management at LANL is currently being cut to $280 million for 2026. In contrast, funding for the lab's nuclear weapons program, which caused the mess to begin with, has more than doubled over the last decade to $5 billion annually. This is mostly driven by expanded production of plutonium pit bomb cores for new design nuclear weapons. LANL and DOE plans for lab cleanup have always been cleanup on the cheap, which is to cap and cover some 500,000 cubic meters of radioactive and toxic waste, leaving them permanently buried in unlined pits and trenches as a perpetual threat to our aquifer, to our groundwater aquifer. And now even this inadequate cleanup may be under threat. The DOE Assistant Secretary of Environmental Management recently announced that his office's name will be changed to the Office of Nuclear Restoration and Revitalization. This aligns with the administration's executive orders promoting the third or fourth self-proclaimed renaissance of nuclear energy, this time likely involving massive data centers and artificial intelligence. This will be energy and water intensive, and no doubt will further deprioritize comprehensive cleanup at LANL. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Scott. I see a hand up, Joe Ritchie.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. That was not intended.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I think that ends the public comment period. Next, we have an update from our Executive Director, Bridget Maestas.
Thank you, Beverly. I'd like to thank Scott for his presentation and welcome Dr. Pyram to the board, to EMLA, and we look forward to all your updates going forward. Welcome to EMLA. I also would like to thank the members for their participation today and the updates from Jessica and Brad and John David Nance. At this time, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge several members who will be departing from the board later this month. Eleanor Bravo and Christy Green. They have served 2 years on the board and they will not be joining us for another term. Miguel Vigil has completed 5 years on the board and he will not be able to join for another term. And Patricio Pacheco has served his complete term of 6 years. He has been a chair and vice chair of the board, and we truly appreciate all his dedication to the EM mission and the significant time he has devoted to the board. It is a big accomplishment to serve 6 years as a volunteer on a board, and Patricio has served that as a member, a chair, a vice chair, and we appreciate all his time that he has dedicated. He has had to drop off and he's on the phone listening, but I'm not sure if he has service to say anything. Patricio, are you available?
Hi, Bridget, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I did hear that. Thank you for the acknowledgement and the shout out, Bridget. I did just want to say I really appreciate and had a really nice time serving on the board. And it was really a pleasure being able to be vice chair and chair of the board as well. It was a great experience. I learned a lot. And I'm actually looking forward to keeping up with everything and keep participating as a member of the public. But thank you all very much for everything. It was great working with you all.
Thank you, and we appreciate you still joining and following the board. Thank you. Last thing I have is our next meeting will be May 20th, and it'll be via WebEx from 1 to 4. I don't have any other updates. We can turn it over to Kara to adjourn the meeting.
I echo Bridget's words. I want to thank everybody for your participation today, and the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.